Gentlemen, and welcome to part 3 of the Battle of Britain. I'm Aaron Boma. I serve as military specialist for Carleton County, and so this is part 3 of the Battle of Britain presentation. So tonight I'm going to start talking to you about the Dowding system, and of course he was top commander for the fighter corps of the Royal Air Force during the Battle of Britain. So during early tests of the chain home system, the slow flow of information from the CH radars and observers to the aircraft often caused them to miss their bandits, their enemy aircraft coming in. The solution today, known as the Dowding system, was to create a set of reporting chains to move information from the various observation points to the pilots in their fighters. It was named after its chief architect, Stuffy Dowding. Reports from CH radars and the observer corps were sent directly to Fighter Command Headquarters, FCHQ at Bentley Priority, where they were filtered to combine multiple reports of the same formations into single tracks. Telephone operators would then forward only the information of interest to the group headquarters, where the map would be recreated. This process was repeated to produce another version of the map at the sector level, covering a much smaller area. Looking over their maps, group level commanders could select squadrons to attack particular targets. From that point, the sector operators would give commands to the fighters to arrange an interception, as well as return them to base. Sector stations also controlled the anti-aircraft batteries in their area. An army officer sat beside each fighter controller and directed the gun crews when to open and cease fire. The Dowding system dramatically improved the speed and accuracy of the information that flowed to the pilots. During the early war period, it was expected that an average interception mission might have a 30% chance of ever seeing their target. During the battle, the Dowding system maintained an average rate of over 75%, and with several examples of 100% rates. Each fighter dispatched found and intercepted its target. In contrast, Luftwaffe fighters attempted to intercept raids. Now, the Luftwaffe fighters attempting to intercept raids had to randomly seek their targets and often returned home having never seen enemy aircraft. The result is what is now known as an example of force multiplication. RAF fighters were as effective as 2 or more Luftwaffe fighters, greatly offsetting or overturning the disparity in actual numbers. Here, the picture of some of the early radar sites in the Dowding system. So the British could know exactly where German fighters were, but they could also manipulate and make the Germans think that they were somewhere else, but they were actually there. And of course, they had an advantage in radar capability as far as over the Luftwaffe. Here's another radar site. So this is, of course, part of the Dowding system, and it certainly increased the effectiveness of intercepting German aircraft coming in. The challenge for the Dowding system. So here it is. The Lord Dowding's battle space. Of course, so this is the Battle of Britain. The challenge is that trying to intercept as many as possible. So Lord Howard's battle space, the Armada. So here's the Armada. Here's the challenge. Here's the challenges. Of course, the Armada, the Battle of Gravelines. Okay, and then so this here. These are the challenges, of course, from France and of course from Norway. where more, and of course, the 13th fighter group would have to fend off against German attacks, whatnot. But a lot of the vast majority, certainly for attacking London, would come directly from France and Belgium. So these are just other locations of where some major battles are. The Duke of Wellington's battle space, the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, and then so the battle space here, 1940. So you have here, and of course, if you can look at the Lord Dowding's battle space, the Battle of Britain in 1940, it's here, and here, and here, and it's all over, because German forces and the Luftwaffe are coming from multiple directions, and the 11th, 12th, and 13th groups are rushing to intercept as much as possible. While Luftwaffe intelligence reports underestimated British fighter forces and aircraft production, the British intelligence estimates went the other way. They overestimated German aircraft production, numbers, and range of aircraft available, and numbers of Luftwaffe pilots. In action, the Luftwaffe believed from their pilot claims and the impression given by aerial reconnaissance that the RAF was close to defeat, and the British made strenuous efforts to overcome the perceived advantages held by their opponents. It is unclear how much the British intercepts of the Enigma cipher used for high-security German radio communications affected the battle. Ultra, the information obtained from Enigma intercepts, gave the highest echelons of the British command a view of German intentions, according to F.W. Winterbotham, who was the senior air staff representative in the Secret Intelligence Service, the SIS. Ultra helped establish the strengths and compositions of the Luftwaffe's formations, the aims for the commanders, and provided early warning of some raids. In early August, it was decided that a small unit would be set up at FCHQ, which would process the flow of information from Bletchley Park and provide Dowding only with the most essential Ultra material. Thus, the Air Ministry did not have to send a continual flow of information to FCHQ, preserving secrecy, and Dowding was not inundated with non-essential information. Keith Park and his controllers were also told about Ultra. In a further attempt to camouflage the existence of Ultra, Dowding created a unit named Number 421 Reconnaissance Flight RAF. This unit, which later became the number 91st Squadron RAF, was equipped with Hurricanes and Spitfires and sent out aircraft to search for and report Luftwaffe formations approaching England. In addition, the radio listening service known as Y Service, monitoring the patterns of Luftwaffe radio traffic, contributed considerably to the early warning of raids. So here we have the RAF and Luftwaffe bases group, and Luftflotte boundaries and range of Luftwaffe Bf-109 fighters, the southern part of British radar coverage. Radar in north of Scotland is not shown, but the lower one, the range of the high-level radar from the British side, and a range of low-level radar along the British coast, pointing to France and Belgium. The range of the Bf-109 going all the way through to London and just past London a bit. That's in the blue. Luftflotte boundaries. So the boundaries are here. So Luftflotte here. You have the commanders. Luftflotte 3, Luftflotte 2, and Luftflotte 1 up north, I believe. RAF boundaries are, of course, here all the way to pointing directly at the coast of France. Those are the group boundaries. The plus ones, the plus markings are, of course, the Luftwaffe bomber bases. The circles here are the circles with the plus are the ones, of course, with the Luftwaffe fighter bases, and the British, the RAF group boundaries reach to just the tip of there. And of course, for our side, for the Royal Air Force fighter command bases, 11th group has a larger number of them. There's 10th group there, 12th group, 13th group has a much larger territory but fewer fighter bases, due to most of the German thwarting of it. Most of the direction of the attacks is coming from France upward to 11 group and attacking southern England, and of course the air bases there, and eventually London and other cities. Tactics. Frontline RAF pilots were acutely aware of the inherent deficiencies of their own tactics. A compromise was adapted whereby squadron formations used much looser formations with one or two wavers, flying independently above and behind to provide increased observation and rear protection. These tended to be the least experienced men and were often the first to be shot down without the other pilots even noticing that they were under attack. During the battle, the 74th Squadron under squadron leader Adolf Sailor-Malin adopted a variation of the German formation called the fours in line astern, which was a vast improvement on the old 3 aircraft VIC. Malin's formation was later generally used by fighter command. So here you can see here, green 1, green 2, green 3. So those are sections, right? And then, so those 6 aircraft make a flight. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's a squadron. So yeah, 12 aircraft would be a squadron. Although not specifically prepared to conduct independent strategic air operations against an opponent, the Luftwaffe was expected to do so over Britain. From July until September 1940, the Luftwaffe attacked fighter command to gain air superiority as a prelude to invasion. This involved the bombing of English Channel convoys, ports, and RAF airfields and supporting industries. Destroying RAF fighter command would allow the Germans to gain control of the skies over the invasion area. It was supposed Bomber Command, Coastal Command, and the Royal Navy could not operate under conditions of German air superiority. The Luftwaffe's poor intelligence meant that their aircraft were not always able to locate their targets, and thus attacks on factories and airfields failed to achieve the desired results. British fighter aircraft production continued at a rate of that surpassed Germany's by 2 to 1. Now, I did mention this in the last 2 presentations of the last 2 parts of the Battle of Britain presentations. The British produced 10,000 aircraft in 1940 in comparison to Germany's 8,000. The replacement of pilots and aircrew was more difficult. Both the RAF and the Luftwaffe struggled to replace manpower losses, though the Germans had larger reserves of trained aircrew. The circumstances affected the Germans more than the British. Operating over home territory, British aircrew could fly again if they survived being shot down. German crews, even if they survived, faced capture. Moreover, bombers had 4 to 5 air crewmen aboard, representing a greater loss of manpower. On the 7th of September, Germans shifted away from the destruction of the RAF supporting structures. German intelligence suggested fighter command was weakening, and an attack on London would force it into a final battle of annihilation, while compelling the British government to surrender. So that is one reason why the RAF was given more breathing room, is because Hitler mistakenly decided to, on September 7th, push more attacks to British cities in terror bombing, which of course allowed the RAF to breathe a lot better and a lot more capable, not being under such sudden attacks day per day. They were able to bring in more forces to the fight and not have to spend more time on fixing infrastructure that was bombed. The phases of battle. So there were 5 phases roughly. Phase 1. The battle covered a shifting geographical area, and there have been differing opinions on significant dates. When the Air Ministry proposed 8th of August as the start, Dowding responded that operations merged into another almost insensibly, and and proposed 10th of July as the onset of increased attacks, with the caution that phases drifted into each other and dates are not firm. The Royal Air Force Museum states that 5 main phases can be identified. Okay, so some of the phases merged into others as well, and that's why there has been, of course, confusion over certain historians. 26th of June to the 16th of July, Storingriff nuisance raids scattered small-scale probing attacks both day and night, armed reconnaissance and mine-laying sorties. From July 4th, daylight, Kanalkampf, the channel battles against shipping towns with aircraft factories. At the beginning of August, with German invasion forces and troop barges being assembled on the French coast, the raids against the south coast of England were increased in size and numbers. Believing that the British early warning system had been destroyed and the coastal towns sufficiently softened up for an invasion, the Luftwaffe began the next stage of their plan. On August 13th, called Aldertag, or Eagle Day, by the German High Command, massive raids began on the airfields of 11th Group. The aim was to destroy the RAF either in the air or on the ground in southeast England. To put pressure on the British defences, the Germans sent high and low-level raids to different targets at the same time. Sometimes low-level raids sneaked past the battered but still working radar stations, and the first warning the British fighter pilots had was bombs landing on their airfields. Particularly good in the low-level role was the Dornier Do-17 and its derivatives. Several of their raids succeeded in achieving complete surprise and escaping any form of interception. This pattern continued into September, and the situation in 11th Group became desperate. Small civilian airfields were used in the emergency, as RAF stations became badly damaged. The Spitfire and Hurricane could easily take off from grass fields, but the maintenance and spares supply situation became dangerously stretched. Ground crews worked in the open suffered heavy casualties from the raids, and many maintenance facilities were destroyed in the bombings. Despite this, the crews kept the fighters as combat ready as possible, winning the battle on the ground as the pilots were in the air. Suggestions were made that the fighters should be pulled back north of the Thames, but Dowding and Park knew that this was exactly what the Germans wanted, effectively giving them air superiority over the intended invasion area. So the 11th Group squadron stayed and fought for their lives. The weight of the battle fell upon 11th Group. Keith Park's tactics were to dispatch individual squadrons to intercept raids. The intention was to subject incoming bombers to continual attacks by relatively small numbers of fighters and try to break up the tight German formations. Once formations had fallen apart, stragglers could be picked off one by one. Where multiple squadrons reached a raid, the procedure was for the slower Hurricanes to tackle the bombers, while the more agile Spitfires held up the fighters' escort. This ideal was not always achieved, resulting in occasions when Spitfires and Hurricanes reversed roles. Park also issued instructions to his units to engage in frontal attacks against the bombers, which were more vulnerable to such attacks. Again, the environment of fast-moving three-dimensional air battles. Few RAF fighter units were able to attack the bombers from head-on. During the battle, some commanders, notably Lee Mowry, proposed squadrons be formed into big wings, consisting of at least 3 squadrons, so that would be 36 aircraft, to attack the enemy in mass, a method pioneered by Douglas Bader. The Kernelkampf comprised a series of running fights over convoys in the English Channel. It was launched partly because Kesselring and Speer were not sure about what else to do, which are commanders of the Luftwaffe, and their units, 2 and 3, and beyond were they were not exactly sure which ships to sink, which not to, and so they pretty much attacked anything that was in the English Channel with the British flag. And partly because it gave German aircrew some training and a chance to probe the British defenses as well. Dowding could provide only minimal shipping protection. And these battles off the coast tended to favor the Germans, whose bomber escorts had the advantage of altitude and outnumbered the RAF fighters. From July 9th, reconnaissance probing by Donair Do-17 bombers put a severe strain on RAF pilots and machines, with high RAF losses to Bf-109s. When 141 Squadron Defiance went into action on 19th of July, 6 were lost to Bf-109s before a squadron of Hurricanes intervened. On 25th of July, a coal convoy and escorting destroyers suffered heavy losses to attacks by Stuka dive bombers. That the Admiralty decided convoys should only travel at night. More as a suggestion, pushing traveling at night being better, not being seen. The RAF shot down 16 raiders but lost 7 aircraft. By August 8th, 18 coal ships and 4 destroyers had been sunk, but the Navy was determined to send a convoy of 20 ships through rather than move the coal by railway. After repeated Stuka attacks that day, 6 ships were badly damaged, 4 were sunk, and only 4 reached their destination. The RAF lost 19 fighters and shot down 31 German aircraft. That's on August 8th. The Navy now cancelled all further convoys through the Channel and sent the cargo by rail. Even so, these early combat encounters provided both sides with experience. The attacks were widespread. Over the night of the 30th of June, alarms were set off in 20 counties by just 20 bombers. These are the nuisance raids. Here you can see HE-111s, Luftwaffe aircraft, Messerschmitt Me-109s, Bf-109s rather, and continue some. Alarms were set off in 20 counties by just 20 bombers. Amazing. Then next day, the first daylight raids occurred during 1st of July on both the Hull in Yorkshire and Wick Caithness. On the 3rd of July, most flights were reconnaissance sorties, but 15 civilians were killed when bombs hit Godford in Surrey, England. Numerous small Strangriff or nuisance raids, both day and night, were made daily through August, September, and into the winter, with aims including bringing RAF fighters up to battle, destruction of specific military and economic targets, and setting off air raid warnings to affect civilian morale. 4 major air raids in August involved hundreds of bombers. In the same month, 1,062 small raids were made, spread across the whole of Britain. Bomber Command and Coastal Command aircrew flew offensive sorties against targets in Germany and France during the battle, as in retaliation. An hour after the declaration of war, Bomber Command launched raids on warships and naval ports by day, and in night raids dropped leaflets, as it was considered illegal to bomb targets which could affect civilians. After the initial disasters of the war, with Vickers Wellington bombers shot down in large numbers attacking Wilhelmshaven, the port of Wilhelmshaven, which is a major early and late submarine port for the U-boats. In Wilhelmshaven, you have to go, of course, to sail out to attack England and British shipping. You have to come out of Wilhelmshaven, go around, it's up in northern Germany, around Denmark, and continue and get into the off the coast of England and out through past Norway. So, shot down in large numbers attacking Wilhelmshaven. They attacked Wilhelmshaven, and the slaughter of the ferry battle squadrons sent to France. It became clear that they would have to operate mainly at night to avoid incurring very high losses. Churchill came to power on the 10th of May 1940, of course, and the War Cabinet on 12th of May agreed that German actions justified unrestricted warfare. And on 14th of May, they authorized an attack on the night of 14th and the 15th of May against oil and rail targets in Germany. At the urging of Clement Attlee, the cabinet on 15th of May authorized a full bombing strategy against suitable military objectives, even where there could be civilian casualties. That evening, a nighttime bomber campaign began against the German oil industry, communications, and forest crops, mainly in the rural area. The RAF lacked accurate night navigation and carried small bomb loads. As the threat mounted, Bomber Command changed targeting priority on the 3rd of June 1940 to attack the German aircraft industry. On the 4th of July, the Air Ministry gave Bomber Command orders to attack ports and shipping. By September, the buildup of invasion barges in the Channel ports had become a top priority target. On the 7th of September, the government issued a warning that the invasion could be expected within the next few days, and that night, Bomber Command attacked the Channel ports and supply dumps on the coast of France. On the 13th of September, they carried out another large raid on the Channel ports, sinking 80 large barges in the port of Ostend. 84 barges were sunk in Dunkirk after another raid on the 17th of September, and by the 19th of September, almost 200 barges had been sunk. The losses of these barges may have contributed to Hitler's decision to postpone Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. Operation Sea Lion, if you remember, is the planned invasion of England, amphibious landing invasion, which was postponed and then eventually cancelled. The success of these raids was in part because the Germans had few Freya radar stations set up in France, so that air defenses of the French harbors were not nearly as good as the air defenses over Germany. Bomber Command had directed some 60% of its strength against the Channel ports, with good success. British bombers here. The Bristol Blenheim is a British light bomber aircraft designed and built by the Bristol Aeroplane Company. Bristol, which was used extensively in the first 2 years, and in some cases throughout the Second World War. The aircraft was developed as Type 142. It's a civilian airliner in response to a challenge from Lord Rothermere to produce the fastest commercial aircraft in Europe. The Type 142 first flew in April 1935, and the Air Ministry, impressed with its performance, ordered a modified design as the Type 142M for the Royal Air Force as a bomber. Deliveries of the newly A development of the Type 142M was the Type 149, which Bristol named the Bolingbroke, retrospectively changed by the Air Ministry to Blenheim Mark IV, and the Type 142M to the Blenheim Mark I. Fairchild Canada built the Type 149 under license as the Bolingbroke. Blenheim's Mark I and the Mark IV were adapted as fighters by the addition of a gun pack of 4 Browning 303 machine guns in the bomb bay. The Mark IV was used as a long-range fighter and as a maritime patrol aircraft. Both aircraft were also used as bomber and gunnery trainers. Really interesting aircraft. There were some missions which produced as an almost 100% casualty rate among the Blenheims. On such operation was mounted on 13th of August 1940 against a Luftwaffe airfield near Aalborg in northeastern Denmark by 12 aircraft of 82nd Squadron. One Blenheim returned early. The pilot was later charged and due to appear before a court-martial, but was killed on another operation. The other 11, which reached Denmark, were shot down, 5 by flak and 6 by Bf-109s. Of the 33 crewmen who took part in the attack, 20 were killed and 13 were captured. Very high casualty rate. One of the biggest oversights of the entire system was the lack of adequate air-sea rescue operations. That's by the RAF. The RAF had started organizing a system in 1940 with high-speed launches, HSLs, based on flying boat bases at some overseas locations, but it was still believed that the amount of cross-channel traffic meant that there was no need for a high rescue service to cover these areas. Downed pilots and aircrew, it was hoped, would be picked up by any boats or ships which happened to be passing by. Otherwise, the local lifeboat would be alerted, assuming someone had seen the pilot go down into the water. Here's one picture here. Aircrew that were picked up. We're in a life raft. RAF aircrew were issued with a life jacket, nicknamed the Mae West, but in 1940 it still required manual inflation, which was almost impossible for someone who was injured or in shock. The waters of the English Channel and Dover Straits are cold, even in the middle of summer, and clothing issued to RAF aircrew did little to insulate them against these freezing conditions. The RAF also imitated the German practice of issuing fluorescent. A conference in 1939 had placed air-sea rescue under Coastal Command because pilots had been lost at sea during the Channel battle on 22nd of August. Control of RAF rescue launches was passed on to the local naval authorities, and 12 Lysanders were given to Fighter Command to help look for pilots at sea. And so these they have small boats, and of course they have the Navy, and that's from the Navy, are issued with rescuing pilots that are shot down in local areas. In all, some 200 pilots and aircrew were lost at sea during the battle. No proper air-sea rescue service was formed until 1941, which sucks for British aircrew because the Germans had better air-sea rescue. So here's phase 2. Target areas. Here you can see, having tested the defenses, phase 2 of the plan was to destroy the the aircraft of Fighter Command, on the ground or in the air. The airfields of Group 11 in particular came in for heavy attacks. So this is August 8th to the 6th of September. So this is they're attacking convoys, raiding tracks, as well as, they're raiding, coastal rail lines, convoys, and airfields, and RDF stations, radar stations. But mainly it would be aircraft manufacturing, and of course 11 group airfields, and yeah. So the 17th to the 12th of the 17th of July to the 12th of August. Daylight Kennelkampf or channel battle attacks on shipping intensified through this period. Increased attacks on ports and coastal airfields, night raids on RAF and aircraft manufacturing. You can see here the raids, where the raids are coming in. This is their tracks coming from Lightfoot 2 and 3 air groups, bomber groups of the Luftwaffe. Increasing larger daylight attacks against shipping in the English Channel, ports along the south and east coasts, and some coastal airfields, with increased night attacks against the west, Midlands, and the east coast, RAF facilities, and the aircraft industry. It's phase 2. So here we have some fighters and their crew that are rushing to them as they're being bombed. That's a very vivid picture. These are British air crews and the Spitfires, and they're rushing to the Spitfires. I believe these are Mark 1s or Mark 2s. They're getting up and they're going in, and they're going to take off and try to take out the guys who are just bombing them. This is phase 2 of that operation still. So talking more, of course the phases, they intertwine with each other sometimes. So I'm going to mention phase 3, just to get into this a little bit. And so phase 3, this is the Blitz beginning, and the main target area would be major cities, and then you have Dover, and then of course you have London, and major target areas. Mass attacks begin against London and other major cities, as well as aircraft factories and other strategic targets. As large numbers of fighters met the day raids, the Luftwaffe switched to night bombing raids. So this is going into phase 3. Large-scale daylight attacks against RAF airfields in southeast England, with the object of exhausting the RAF's ability to provide a defense. And of course, night attacks begin, and then they are continued. On the 13th of August to the 6th of September, at Orangef, Eagle attack, the main assault. Attempt to destroy the RAF in southern England, including massive daylight attacks on RAF airfields, followed by 9th of August by heavy night bombing of ports and industrial cities, and including the suburbs of London. Poor weather delayed Adeltanger Eagle Day until 13th of August 1940. On the 12th of August, the first attempt was made to blind the dowding system when aircraft from the Specialist Fighter Bomber Unit, Indo-Probung Group 210 attacked 4 radar stations. 3 were briefly taken off the air, but were back working within 6 hours. The raids appeared to show that British radars were difficult to knock out. The failure to mount follow-up attacks allowed the RAF to get the stations back on the air. And the Luftwaffe neglected strikes on the supporting infrastructure, which was a mistake, such as phone lines and power stations, which could have rendered the radars useless, even if the towers themselves, which were very difficult to destroy, remained intact. Erotang, Eagle Day, opened with a series of attacks led again by Irpo 210 on coastal airfields. Special bomber group on coastal airfields used as forward landing grounds for the RAF fighters, as well as satellite airfields, including Manston and Hawkinge. As the week drew on, the airfield attacks moved further inland, and repeated raids were made on the radar chain. On the 15th of August was the greatest day when the Luftwaffe mounted the largest number of sorties of the campaign. Luftfoot 5 attacked the north of England, believing fighter command strength to be concentrated in the south. Raiding forces from Denmark and Norway ran into unexpected strong resistance. Inadequately escorted BF-110s, inadequately escorted by BF-110 fighter aircraft, bombers were shot down in large numbers. Northeast England was attacked by 65 Heinkel HE-111s, escorted by 34 Messerschmitt BF-110s. That would be the two-engine fighter aircraft I had mentioned in earlier presentations. And RAF Great Deerfield was attacked by 50 unescorted JU Junkers 88. Out of 115 bombers and 35 fighters sent, 75 planes were destroyed, and many others damaged beyond repair. Furthermore, due to early engagement by RAF fighters, many of the bombers dropped their payloads ineffectively early. As a result of these casualties, Luftfoot 5 did not appear in strength again in this campaign, so they were heavily damaged. You can see here these. I love these paintings. These paintings and these pictures are from either different simulators and games, also as well as many paintings. They're very vividly done, well done, and shows how dogfighting works, shows how bombing of the British airfields work, and of course in phase 2 when the our Royal Air Force fighters are taking off and pilots are rushing to. That's very vivid. Those are vivid images of what was happening on the ground. On the afternoon of August 15th, Hetman Walter Rubensdorfer, leading Group 210, mistakenly bombed Croydon Airfield on the outskirts of London instead of the intended target, RAF Kenley. German intelligence reports made the Luftwaffe optimistic that the RAF thought to be dependent on local air control was struggling with supply problems and pilot issues. After a major raid attacking Biggin Hill on 18th of August, Luftwaffe aircrew said they had been unopposed. The airfield was completely destroyed and asked, "Is England already finished?" In accordance with the strategy agreed on the 6th of August, defeat of the RAF was to be followed by bombing military and economic targets, systematically extending up to the Midlands. Goring ordered attacks on aircraft factories on the 19th of August 1940. 60 raids on the night of the 19th to 20th of August targeted the aircraft industry and harbors, and bombs fell on suburban areas around London, Croydon, Wimbledon, and the Maldons. Night raids were made on 22nd of August on Aberdeen, Bristol, and South Wales. That morning, bombs were dropped on Harrow, Wealdstone, on the outskirts of London. Overnight, on the 22nd, 23rd of August, the output of an aircraft factory at Filton near Bristol was drastically affected by a raid in which Junkers 88 bombers released over 16 tons of high explosive bombs. On the night of 23rd to 24th of August, over 200 bombers attacked the Fort Dunlop tire factory in Birmingham, with a significant effect on production. A sustained bombing campaign began on the 24th of August, with the largest raid so far, killing 100 in Portsmouth. And that night, several areas of London were bombed. The East End was set ablaze, and bombs landed on central London. Some historians believe that these bombs were dropped accidentally by a group of Henkel HE-111s, which had failed to find their target. This account has been contested. Goring's directive, issued on the 23rd of August 1940, ordered ceaseless attacks on the aircraft industry and on RAF ground organization to force the RAF to use its fighters, continuing the tactic of luring them up to be destroyed, and adding that focused attacks were to be made on the RAF airfields. From 24th of August onwards, the battle was a fight between Kesselring's Luftwaffe 2 and Park's 11 group. The Luftwaffe concentrated all their strength on knocking out fighter command and made repeated attacks on the airfields. Of the 33 heavy attacks in the following 2 weeks, 24 were against airfields. The key sector stations were hit repeatedly: Biggin Hill, Hornchurch, 4 times each, Debden and North Weald, twice each. Croydon, Gravesend, Rochford, Hawkinge, and Menston were also attacked in strength. Coastal Command's East Church was bombed at least 7 times because it was believed to be a fighter command aerodrome. At times, these raids caused some damage to the sector stations, threatening the integrity of the Downing system. To offset some losses, some 58 Fleet Air Arm fighter pilot volunteers were seconded to RAF squadrons, and a similar number of former ferry battle pilots were used. Most replacements were from operational training units, OTUs, had as little as 9 hours flying time and no gunnery or air-to-air combat training. At this point, the multinational nature of fighter command came to the fore. Many squadrons and personnel from the air forces of the Dominions were already attached to the RAF, including top-level commanders: Australians, Canadians, New Zealanders, Rhodesians, and South Africans. In addition, there were other nationalities represented, including Free French and Belgian, and a Jewish pilot from the British Mandate of Palestine. They were bolstered by the arrival of fresh Czechoslovak and Polish squadrons. That's like 303 Squadron, what I mentioned. These had been held back by Dowding, who thought non-English speaking aircrew would have trouble working with within his control system. Polish and Czech flyers proved to be especially effective. The pre-war Polish Air Force had lengthy and extensive training and high standards. With Poland conquered and under brutal German occupation, the pilots of number 303 Squadron, Polish Squadron, the highest scoring Allied unit, were strongly motivated. Joseph František, a Czech regular airman who had flown from the occupation of his own country to join the Polish and then French air forces before arriving in Britain, flew as a guest of 303 Squadron and was ultimately credited with the highest RAF score in the Battle of Britain. This is the Ju-88, the Junkers Ju-88. Its first flight is 21st of December 1936. It's actually introduced in 1939. This becomes its role is a tactical dive and torpedo bomber, but it's also used as a night and heavy fighter, but it is a multi-role combat aircraft, and it's used as one of the main medium bombers in the Battle of Britain. It served as a bomber, dive bomber, night fighter, torpedo, and also a reconnaissance aircraft. But Of course, the Luftwaffe had these, and Junkers were developing them. They had built 15,183 of these aircraft. Amazing. So there were many different variants of them, and these were definitely used in, of course, the Battle of Norway. They were used in the Battle of France, and then, of course, in the Battle of Britain. By August 1940, A1s and A5s were reaching operational use just as the battle was intensifying. The Battle of Britain proved very costly, of course, to the Luftwaffe. Its higher speed did not prevent Ju-88 losses from exceeding those of its Dornier Do-17 and Heinkel He-111 stablemates, despite being deployed in smaller numbers than either. Ju-88 losses over Britain in 1940 totaled 303 aircraft between July and October 1940. Do-17 and He-111 fighters bomber losses for the same period were 132 and 252 machines destroyed, respectively. Of all the losses suffered by the Ju-88 at the time, however, a number were due to the tricky behavior of the plane, especially when compared with the proven He-111, and to the crew's lack of experience on the type, the different types of the aircraft. Many having converted to the Ju-88 only shortly before. Of the 39 losses recorded for July 1940, for example, only 20 were due to enemy action. It was amazing. And these are a good aircraft, very capable. So here's the Ju-88s carrying some the outside and the outer wings, some 4 of the heavy bomb load, look like at least 2,000 pounders. So these this is some of the major paintings I was talking about of the Battle of Britain. You can see here Hawker Hurricanes are coming in to intercept here, and you have on this side here you have a painting of the Spitfires coming in. So more night raids were made around London on 25th of August, when bombs fell on Croydon, Benstead, Lewisham, Urbridge, Harrow, and Hayes. London was on red alert over the night of 28th, 29th of August, with bombs reported in Finchley, St. Pancras, Wembley, Wood Green, Southgate, Old Kent Road, Mill Hill, Ilford, Chigwell, and Hendon. These are all different places all over England, and those in London. And those are some of those are suburbs of London, and in different towns. The effect of the German attacks on airfields is unclear. According to Stephen Bungay, Dowding, is a historian, I believe, Dowding in a letter to Hugh Trenchard accompanying Park's report on the period of August 8th to the 10th of September 1940, states that the Luftwaffe achieved very little in the last week of August and the first week of September. The only section station to be shut down operationally was Biggin Hill, and it was non-operational for just 2 hours. Dowding admitted 11 groups' efficiency was impaired, but despite serious damage to some airfields, only 2 out of 13 heavily attacked airfields were down for more than a few hours. The German refocus on London was not critical. Retired Air Vice Marshal Peter Day, head of the RAF Museum, discussed the logistics of the battle in 2000 and 2010. He did some lectures on this, I believe, and was interviewed, dealing specifically with the single-seat fighters. Day contends that not only was British airfield production replacing aircraft, but replacement pilots were keeping pace with losses. The number of pilots in RAF Fighter Command increased during July, August, and September. The figures indicate the numbers of pilots available never decreased. From July 1st, 200 were available, and from August 1st, 1,400 were available. Just over that number were in the field by September. In October, the figure was nearly 1,600. By November 1st, it was 1,800 were available. Throughout the battle, the RAF had more fighter pilots available than the Luftwaffe. Although the RAF's reserves of single-seat fighters fell during July, the wastage was made up for by an efficient civilian repair organization, CRO, which by December had repaired and put back into service some 4,955 aircraft, and by aircraft held at Air Servicing Unit, ASU airfields. So a whole whack of airfields and civilian repair organizations were created to repair the damaged aircraft, the gap that was not coming back into service, and that gap was quickly filled, and aircraft were put back into service much faster by these crews, CROs and ASUs. This was a massive operation. Every civilian in some capacity in England was doing something in capacity with the War Department, either building something or working in the factories or repairing units. There were many women as well as men. Many women were in the factories working during wartime. It was an all-in effort. Hitler was enraged by the attack on Berlin. There was an attack, of course, the British Bomber Command launched attacks in retaliation as an attack from the attacks on London. They attacked Berlin in response. So Hitler was enraged about that. And because it seemed that the attacks on airfields were not destroying enough RAF fighters, he ordered a change of targets. By attacking cities and industry, the Germans hoped to break British morale and to destroy the factories that built fighter aircraft. They also hoped that RAF fighters would gather in force around the cities to protect them, which would make it easier for the Luftwaffe to shoot them down in the numbers required to establish air superiority. The change of plan was to mistake for a number of reasons. Of course, it was a mistake for a number of reasons. It gave 11 Group a chance to repair their airfields and radar sites, so the defenses became fully operational again. And this is one thing I mentioned. The German Me-109 fighter could only carry enough fuel for about 20 minutes flight over Britain. So London was on the edge of its limited range. Finally, the German raids now came within the range of 12 Group and their large formation tactics known as big wings. Much has been written about the different tactics employed by number 11 and number 12 groups and their commanders, and the supposed disagreements these differences caused. Suffice to say that 11 groups' fast response tactics with whatever was available, meeting the enemy formations as far from their targets as possible, was best suited to their geographical proximity to the German bases. 11 Group squadrons simply did not have the time to assemble. They had to get airborne and climb to height as quickly as possible or miss intercepting the raid altogether. 12 Group, being further north, had somewhat more time for a large formation of fighters to assemble and climb to meet the oncoming attacks, tactics that suited their circumstances. Dowding, as befits a true leader, allowed his group commanders to run their organizations as they saw fit. The detail work being done was of course being done at a group level, while he dealt with the overall picture. The life of an 11th Group pilot was made more difficult by these operating methods, but Park understood the true situation of his command and employed his squadrons with brilliant effectiveness. In the light of the outcome of the battle and the fact that for many of the days he had the fate of a nation's resting on his shoulder. The fate of a nation resting on his shoulder, Park must be considered as the architect of the RAF's victory. Knowing the target to be London and in the industrial centers, the British controllers now had time to assemble a large number of fighters to attack the German formations and break them up before they could bomb. The appearance of large numbers of Hurricanes and Spitfires came as something as a shock to the Luftwaffe pilots, who had been told by their intelligence officers that Fighter Command had practically been wiped out by the earlier raids against the airfields. By changing tactics and targets, the Germans had actually helped Fighter Command to deal with the raids, gave them some breathing room. For the people living in the cities, the Blitz had begun, as night raids followed daytime raids, and gave the civilians little rest. Everybody was on the front line. There was little the RAF could do to stop the night raids. Airborne radar was in its infancy, but there were some successes for the Blindhelm, Defiant, and the early Beaufighter night fighter squadrons. Some of the Hurricane and Spitfire day fighter squadrons also took part in the night defenses, but relied largely on luck to make an interception. So Phase 4, the initial Blitz. 7th of September to the 2nd of October, the Blitz commences. The main focus, day and night attacks on London. Over 30,000 people died in the London Blitz. London suffered severe damage and heavy casualties, the worst hit part being the Docklands area. By the end of the war, just under 30,000 Londoners had been killed by the bombing. And that was London. That was during the in total of the Second World War. Actually, was just over 30,000 dead in London from the bombings, and over 50,000 seriously injured. Tens of thousands of buildings were destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of people were made homeless. And that's certainly during this time. That's in total during the war for London, but also largely due to the Battle of Britain as well. And then later on being the buzz bombs and the V-2 rockets as well. So communal shelters. Deep shelters provided most protection against a direct hit. They were the most protection against a direct hit. The government did not build them for large populations before the war because of the cost, time to build, and fears that their safety would cause occupants to refuse to leave to return to work, or that anti-war sentiment would develop in large congregations of civilians. The government saw the leading role taken by the Communist Party in advancing and advocating the building of deep shelters as an attempt to damage civilian morale, especially after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939, which I had mentioned was the dividing up of Poland just before the invasion of Poland by the Nazis. They were the secret pact to divide up Poland between Stalin and Adolf Hitler. The most important existing communal shelters were the London Underground stations. Although many civilians had used them for shelters during the First World War, the government in 1939 refused to allow the stations to be used as shelters so as not to interfere with commuter and troop travel, and the fears that occupants might refuse to leave. Underground officials were ordered to lock station entrances during raids, but by the second week of heavy bombing, the government relented and ordered the stations to be opened. Each day, orderly lines of people queued until about 4 p.m. when they were allowed to enter the stations. In mid-September 1940, about 150,000 people at a night slept in the underground. Although by winter and spring, the numbers declined to 100,000 or less. Battle noises were muffled, and sleep was easier in the deepest stations, but many people were killed from direct hits on stations. In March 1943, 173 men, women, and children were crushed to death at Bethnal Green Tube Station in a panic after a woman fell down the steps as she entered the station. So, Cardamom. So here is the entrance of one of these public shelters and stations, and here you can see underground stations here. and thousands of people that would be sleeping in there. Sometimes these raids would be going on day and night, day after day. Some of them would just live down there. Some of them would just stay down there. They were too afraid to go back up to the house. Some would come up, find only rubble of where they were living in downtown, near the dockyards and in other areas in central London. Buildings were destroyed. The Blitz had come, and the Blitz was not just bombs, high explosive bombs, but it also came in incendiary bomblets, which would parachute down and land on roofs, ignite, and light up houses, buildings, infrastructure, big centers, and those buildings would become ablaze. Buildings would be collapsing, and of course, firemen, in a sense, were overwhelmed, and it became the firestorm, which London, and then certainly one night, and then numbers of nights, giant firestorms, which would overtake London, much of London downtown at the time. Certainly in one night, I believe it was in September, when that had happened, I believe. I'll take a look. Thousands died, but thousands of buildings were destroyed. I mean, hundreds of them in one to two nights. Whole streets were destroyed, were set ablaze. Definitely a time where you'd expect the English people to, as what they did, rise up. Of course, when you have the Prime Minister Winston Churchill come on the line saying, "We'll fight them in the air, we'll fight them in the sea, we'll fight them on the land, we will never surrender." And he did this. The people rose up and they kept fighting. In fact, it did not break morale. The British people became more determined than ever. So the Blitz, as you can see here, the heavy damage of downtown areas, and this is the pathways of where they would attack. Heavy bomber raids against cities continued at night. During the day, fighter bombers flew nuisance raids against coastal towns, airfields, and other military targets. The raids petered out as the weather worsened. And this is going on. So it might have been the heavy blitz. It might have been, actually, I think it was in October when the fire was certainly engulfing downtown London. Yeah, that was in October. Sorry. It's a lot of information to cover, and I'm trying to get every date right as much as I can. So, as from 6th of October to October 31st, this was the situation in London. As the long, hot summer ran into October, the German daylight bomber losses became too heavy. Their bomber force started to operate only at night, and the damage they caused to Britain's cities was enormous. Many civilian organizations were set up to help deal with the wounded people and damaged buildings. The German raids continued, but the RAF started to develop night fighters equipped with radar which could tackle the problem. The early AI airborne intercept radar sets were being fitted to Blenheim, Defiant, and Beaufighter aircraft, and proved increasingly effective as the equipment developed and operational experience was increased. During the day, German fighters, mostly Me-109s, but occasionally Me-110s, were sent over carrying bombs in small and large-scale jug bombers or Jabo raids. Largely, these nuisance raiders were aimed at engaging the RAF fighters and disrupting defensive operations over the southeast. Defenders, tired from the night attacks, were stretched still further by these raids. They flew fast and high and were difficult to intercept. The radar warning was not long enough to allow a Spitfire to climb to this height from the ground, so the RAF had regular patrols between 15,000 and 20,000 feet. This was a costly and inefficient use of the aircraft and pilots. And use of these aircraft and pilots exactly the situation the control system had helped to avoid during the earlier phases of the battle. But German losses began to increase. The weather also began to worsen, and the raids stopped in late October. And here is the Blitz and the fire, which you can see here. Fire crews are largely overwhelmed. Amazing that they did not. There were some major buildings that they had definitely could have lost, but they had pushed fire day and night. Well, certainly at night, all night, making sure that these buildings did not catch fire. The Germans then realized that the RAF could not be defeated in 1940. Germany was also preparing to attack Russia, so Operation Sea Lion was cancelled indefinitely and eventually abandoned altogether. The Battle of Britain was over. Strangely, for such a groundbreaking battle, the first to be decided purely in the air, and the first real test of air power as a defensive and offensive weapon, it did not really end so much as petered out. So this here is St. Paul's Cathedral. Photographer taken in London. This was a photograph taken in London during the night air raid of 29th and 30th December 1940. This is late December. So it didn't really battle, like they said, it didn't really end. It just kind of petered out. There were still raids against London throughout those time after the 31st of October. So this is the 114th night of the Blitz of World War II. This is the 114th night of during the battle, after the Battle of Britain and during the Battle of Britain. So it shows St. Paul's Cathedral as illuminated by fires and surrounded by the smoke of burning buildings. It was taken by photographer Herbert Mason in the early hours of the 30th of December from the roof of the Northcliffe House. This is the Daily Mail building on Tudor Street, close to Fleet Street. Amazing. And this is again here, and this is just off another angle of that on the other side. Buildings that are completely destroyed. But St. Paul's Cathedral, they did their best to save it, even though it was significantly damaged. It held. Hitler's Directive Number 17 for the conduct of air and sea warfare against England, issued on the 1st of August 1940, reserved to himself the right to decide on terror attacks as measures of reprisal. Hitler issued a directive that London was not to be bombed save on his sole instruction. In preparation, detailed target plans under the code name Operation Logue for raids on communications, power stations, armament works, and docks in the Port of London were distributed to the Flicker Course in July. The port areas were crowded next to residential housing, and civilian casualties would be expected. But this would combine military and economic targets with indirect effects on morale. The strategy agreed on 6th of August was for raids on military and economic targets in towns and cities to culminate in a major attack on London. In mid-August, raids were made on targets on the outskirts of London, as I mentioned. Luftwaffe doctrine included the possibility of retaliatory strikes on cities. Since May 11th, small-scale night raids by RAF Bomber Command had frequently bombed residential areas. Germans assumed this was deliberate, and as the raids increased in frequency, the population grew impatient for measures of revenge. On 25th of August 1940, 81 bombers of Bomber Command were sent out to raid industrial and commercial targets in Berlin. And that is the response that really made Hitler decide, okay, we're going to go full scale in London. Clouds prevented accurate identification, and the bombs fell across the city, causing some casualties among the civilian population, as well as damage to residential areas. Continuing RAF raids on Berlin led to Hitler withdrawing his directive on the 30th of August and giving the go-ahead to the planned bombing offensive. On the 3rd of September, Göring planned to bomb London daily, with General Albert Kesselring's enthusiastic support. Having received reports, the average strength of RAF squadrons was down to 5 or 7 fighters out of 12, and their airfields in the area were out of action. Of course, which was wrong. Hitler issued a directive on September 5th to attack cities including London. In his widely publicized speech delivered on the 4th of September 1940, Hitler condemned the bombing of Berlin and presented the planned attacks on London as reprisals. The first daylight raid was titled Vergeltungsangriff, Revenge Attack. So he states, well, you drop 10,000 tons of bombs on Berlin. We'll drop 40,000 tons of bombs on London. That was basically his response. And giving a much, or maybe I forget which number it was, but here you can see more pics of just the life in London. The situation continues. It seems surreal. This picture. This picture is, of course, you got the milkman on his daily routine, delivering milk to people who are still living in their homes. Some maybe have lost loved ones, some maybe not. Some have been maybe incredibly lucky, but he's walking down streets of rubble. It's a surreal scene. You get firemen behind him trying to put out fires. Here's another scene of one of the communal shelters, and here's part of the Blitz here. As you can see some of the magnitude of some of the fires. This picture here below is, of course, of the anti-aircraft lights, and putting lights to try to for the fighters and to show, and of course for the anti-aircraft crews to try to shoot them down with anti-aircraft fire, flat guns, as well as of course the night fighters are, like the Buford fighters are going into position to try to shoot them down as well. That's anti-aircraft fire, as you can see there. Bofors gun, 37 millimeter, from 37 to 40 millimeter and higher. On September 7th, a massive series of raids involving nearly 400 bombers and more than 600 fighters targeted docks in the east end of London, day and night. The RAF anticipated attacks on airfields, and 11 Group rose to meet them. In greater numbers than the Luftwaffe expected, the first official deployment of 11 Group's Lee Mallory's Big Wing took 20 minutes to form up, missing its intended target but encountering another formation of bombers while still climbing. They returned apologetic about their limited success and blamed the delay on being scrambled too late. The German press jubilantly announced that one great cloud of smoke stretches tonight from the middle of London to the mouth of the Thames. Reports reflected the briefings given to crews before the raids. Everyone knew about the last cowardly attacks on German cities and thought about wives, mothers, and children. And then came that word, vengeance. Pilots reported seeing ruined airfields as they flew towards London. Appearances which gave intelligence reports that impression of devastating defenses. Göring maintained that the RAF was close to defeat, making invasion feasible. Fighter command had been at its lowest ebb, short of men and machines, and the break from airfield attacks followed them, and the break from airfield attacks allowed them to recover. 11 Group had considerable success in breaking up daytime raids. 12 Group repeatedly disobeyed orders and failed to meet requests to protect 11 Group airfields, but their experiments with increasingly large, big wings had some success. The Luftwaffe began to abandon their morning raids, with attacks on London starting late in the afternoon for 57 consecutive nights. That's just some more of the background of information. On September 7th, the government issued a warning that the invasion could be expected within the next few days, and that night Bomber Command attacked the channel ports and supply dumps. On the 13th of September, they carried out another large raid on the channel ports, sinking 80 large barges in the port of Ostend. 84 barges were sunk in Dunkirk, and another raid on September 17th, and by the 19th, almost 200 barges had been sunk. Amazing. So, I think I might have read some of this before. At the 14th September OKW conference, Hitler acknowledged that the Luftwaffe had still not gained the air superiority needed for the Operation Sea Lion invasion. In agreement with Raeder's written recommendation, Hitler said that the campaign was to intensify regardless of invasion plans. The decisive thing is the ceaseless continuation of air attacks. Juschnik proposed attacking residential areas to cause mass panic, but Hitler turned this down. He reserved to himself the option of terror bombing. British morale was to be broken by destroying infrastructure, armaments and manufacturing, fuel and food stocks. On the 16th of September, Göring gave the order for this change in forcing the British to give up. Hitler hoped it might result in 8 million going mad, referring to the population of London in 1940, which would cause a catastrophe for the British. In those circumstances, Hitler said, even a small invasion might go a long way. Hitler was against canceling the invasion, as the cancellation would reach the ears of the enemy and strengthen his resolve. On 19th September, Hitler ordered a reduction in work on Sea Lion. He doubted if strategic bombing could achieve its aims, but ending the air war would be an open admission of defeat. He had to maintain the appearance of concentration on defeating Britain. To conceal from Joseph Stalin his covert aim to invade the Soviet Union, that was to come on June 22nd of 1941. So the nighttime blitz. Throughout the battle, most Luftwaffe bombing raids had been at night. They increasingly suffered unsustainable losses in daylight raids, and the massive daytime attacks were on September 15th. A raid of 70 bombers on the 18th of September also suffered badly. And day raids were gradually phased out, leaving the main attacks at night. Fighter command still lacked any successful way of intercepting nighttime raiders. The night fighter force was mostly Blindhams and Bullfighters and lacked airborne radar, so had no way of finding the bombers. Anti-aircraft guns were diverted to London's defenses, but had a much reduced success rate against night attacks. From mid-September, Luftwaffe daylight bombing was gradually taken over by Bf 109 fighters, adapted to take one 250-kilogram bomb. Small groups of fighter bombers could carry out Storenge or nuisance raids, escorted by large escort formations of about 200 to 300 combat aircraft. They flew at altitudes of over 20,000 feet, 6,100 meters, where the Bf 109 had an advantage over RAF fighters, except the Spitfire. Here's another major painting. The Anglo HE-111s bombing these bombing raids over London. To disrupt bombing operations over the big cities, the British even put obstacles in the way, and those obstacles were hot air balloons, small blimps that would set in the way of the bombers, where they'd have to swerve off of target and miss potential targets they were aiming at. And it was actually a good aid to, it was certainly good to use. It was effective, but only partially. Here you can see during the Blitz, the night bombing raids of the anti-aircraft fire and anti-aircraft lights going up into the air, searchlights. The paintings are somewhat amazing. The raids disturbed civilians, these nuisance raids, and continued the war of attrition against fighter command. The raids were intended to carry out precision bombing on military or economic targets, but it was hard to achieve sufficient accuracy with a single bomb. Sometimes when attacked, the fighter bombers had to jettison the bomb to function as fighters. The RAF was at a disadvantage and changed defensive tactics by introducing standing patrols of Spitfires at high altitude to monitor incoming raids. On a sighting, other patrols at lower altitude would fly up to join the battle. A Junkers Ju-88 returned from a raid on London was shot down in Kent on the 27th of September, resulting in the Battle of the Graveney Marsh, the last action between British and foreign military forces on British mainland soil. German bombing of Britain reached its peak in October and November 1940. In post-war interrogation, Wilhelm Keitel described the aims as economic blockade. In conjunction with submarine warfare, the attrition of Britain's military and economic resources. The Luftwaffe wanted to achieve victory on its own and was reluctant to cooperate with the Navy. Their strategy for blockade was to destroy ports and storage facilities in towns and cities. Priorities were based on the pattern of trade and distribution. So for these months, London was the main target. In November, their attention turned to other ports and industrial targets around Britain. Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion course 13th of October until the spring of 1941. It was not until Hitler's Directive 21 was issued on 18th of December 1940 that the threat to Britain of invasion finally ended. So here's more just paintings of the Blitz. So October and November, more of these fires and the firestorms, the great firestorms were coming into play. And here you have one of the close-ups of the searchlights. And of course these are giving warnings to fighter command, and also to air raid crews for civil defense operations to get crews and civilians underground before the bombs are dropped. Another amazing, this is an actual photograph of a major raid over London. So phase 5, smaller raids, and of course the heavy bombing of London continued through phase 5. 3rd to 31st of October, large-scale night bombing raids, mostly on London. Daylight attacks now confined to small-scale fighter bomber Storengate raids, luring RAF fighters into dogfights, and that was the nuisance raids. Smaller-scale daylight fighter bombers attacks, while large-scale night attacks continued mostly against London. This was also the start of what came to be called the Blitz on the capital, and against other towns and cities and towns, which lasted until May 1941. And it continued even though the Luftwaffe had lost much of its bomber capability in the early days, in like September, October, November. it was achieving only terrorization of the British people, but their morale was lifted, and their determination was much more fierce, and continued on. Following Germany's rapid territorial gains in the battle, France, the Luftwaffe had to reorganize its forces, set up bases along the coast, and rebuild after heavy losses. It began small-scale bombing raids on Britain on the night of 5th 6th of June, and continued sporadic attacks throughout the June and July. And this, of course, I know it seems confusing. But all these phases are conjoining with each other, and in continuing on in different segments. And this is just before these sporadic raids are coming on in numerous different times during the Battle of Britain, including during the time of the Blitz and after the Blitz. The first large-scale attack was at night on the 18th and 19th of June, when small raids scattered between Yorkshire and Kent involving in total 100 bombers. The nuisance raids, which involved only a few aeroplanes, sometimes just one, were used to train bomber crews in both day and night attacks, to test defenses and try out methods. With most flights at night, they found that rather than carrying small numbers of large, high explosive bombs, it was more effective to use more small bombs, similarly incendiaries, to cover a large area to set effective fires, and which was used on London. These trained flights continued throughout August and into the first week of September. Against this, the raids also gave the British time to assess the German tactics, and invaluable time for the RAF fighters and anti-aircraft defenses to prepare and gain experience. So the royal family, during this time, during the battle, and for the rest of the war, an important factor in keeping public morale high was the continued presence in London of King George the Sixth and his wife, Queen Elizabeth. When war broke out in 1939, the King and the Queen decided to stay in London and not flee to Canada, as had been suggested. George VI and Elizabeth officially stayed in Buckingham Palace throughout the war, although they often spent weekends at Windsor Castle to visit their daughters, Elizabeth, the future Queen, and Margaret. Buckingham Palace was damaged by bombs which landed in the grounds on the 10th of September and on 13th of September. More serious damage was caused by two bombs which destroyed the royal chapel. The royal couple were in a small sitting room about 80 yards from where the bombs exploded. On the 24th of September, in recognition of the bravery of civilians, King George VI inaugurated the award of the George Cross. So statistics. Yeah, tongue twisted. Statistics overall by the 2nd of November, the RAF fielded 1,796 pilots, an increase of over 40% from July's 1940s count of 1,259 pilots. Based on German sources, a Luftwaffe intelligence officer, Otto Bechel, attached to KG-2 in February 1944, translated by the Air Historical Branch. Stephen Bungay asserts German fighter and bomber strength declined without recovery, and that from August to December 1940, the German fighter and bomber strength declined by 30 and 25%. In contrast, Williamson Murray argues, using translations by the Air Historical Branch, that 1,380 German bombers were on strength on 29th of June 1940, 1,420 bombers on 28th September, and 1,423 level bombers on 2nd of November, and 1,393 bombers on November 30th, 1940. In July to into September, the number of Luftwaffe pilots fell, available pilots fell by 136, but the number of operational pilots had shrunk by 171 by September. The trained organization of the Luftwaffe was failing to produce losses. German fighter pilots, in contrast to popular perception, were not afforded training or rest rotations, unlike their British counterparts. The first week of September accounted for 25% of fighter commands and 24% of Luftwaffe overall losses. Between the dates of 26th of August, 6th of September, on only one day, September 1st, did the Germans destroy more aircraft than they lost. Losses were 325 German and 248 British. Luftwaffe losses for August numbered 774 aircraft to all causes, representing 18.5% of all combat aircraft at the beginning of the month. Fighter commands losses in August were 426 fighters destroyed, amounting to 40% of 1,061 fighters available on August 3rd. Amazing. In addition, 99 German bombers and 27 other types were destroyed between the 1st and 29th of August. From July to September, the Luftwaffe's loss records indicate the loss of 1,636 aircraft, 1,184 to enemy action. This represented 47% of the initial strength of single-engine fighters and 66% of twin-engine fighters and 45% of bombers. This indicates the Germans were running out of aircrew as well as aircraft. And that's certainly something that definitely allowed the British to, of course, with the bombing of London and the re-strengthening of Route 11, you look at the war of attrition in the sense that the Germans had lost so many aircraft that finally the German war machine, for the first time ever, is stopped dead cold. Throughout the battle, the Germans greatly underestimated the size of the RAF and the scale of British aircraft production. Across the Channel, the Air Intelligence Division of the Air Ministry consistently overestimated the size of the German air enemy and the productive capacity of the German aviation industry. As the battle was fought, both sides exaggerated the losses inflicted on the other by an equally large margin. The intelligence picture formed before the battle encouraged the Luftwaffe to believe that such losses pushed fighter command to the very edge of defeat, while the exaggerated picture of German air strength persuaded the RAF that the threat it faced was larger and more dangerous than was the case. This led the British to the conclusion that another fortnight of attacks on airfields might force fighter command to withdraw their squadrons from the south of England. The German misconception, on the other hand, encouraged first complacency, then strategic misjudgment. The shift of targets from air bases to industry and communications was taken because it was assumed that fighter command was virtually eliminated, which is certainly untrue. And I've got that wrong before too in other presentations I've done. The Germans, of course, thought that they were on the verge of defeat, but of course it allowed them to breathe a lot more and being able to respond and repair aircraft and then respond and hit back further. Between 24th of August and 4th September, the German serviceability rates, which were acceptable at Stuka units, were running at 75% with Bf-109s, 70% with bombers, 65% with Bf-110s, indicating a shortage of spare parts. All units were well below established strength. The attrition was beginning to affect the fighters in particular. By 14th of September, the Luftwaffe's Bf-109 Grunch fighter possessed only 67 of their operational crews against authorized aircraft. For Bf-110 units, it was 46%, and for bombers it was just 59%. A week later, the figures had dropped to 64%, 52%, and then 52%. Serviceability rates in fighter commands, fighter squadrons between 24th of August and 7th September were listed at 64.8 and 24th of August 64.7 on 31st and then 64.5 and on 7th of September 1940. So that was their effectiveness. Their figures and effectiveness dropped certainly to almost half. Due to the failure of the Luftwaffe to establish air supremacy, a conference assembled on 14th of September at Hitler's headquarters. Hitler concluded that air superiority had not yet been established and promised to review the situation on September 17th for possible landings on, of course, 27th of September or 8th of October. 3 days later, when the when the evidence was clear that the German Air Force had greatly exaggerated the extent of their successes against the RAF, Hitler postponed the Operation Sea Lion, of course, and then, yeah. Propaganda, of course, was certainly high on the German side. Certainly, the OKW communiques matched Britain's efforts in claiming the upper hand. Certainly, propaganda was an important element of the air war, which began to develop over Britain. And when the Luftwaffe began small probing daylight raids to test RAF defenses, it certainly was there, and clear and present. These daily claims were important both in sustaining British home front morale and persuading American support for England. In fact, it was not until May 1947 that actual figures were released to the public of the deaths and the numbers, and it's quite something. So the aftermath of the Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain marked the first major defeat of Germany's military forces, with air superiority seen as the key to victory. Pre-war theories had led to exaggerated fears of strategic bombing, and UK public opinion was buoyed by coming through the ordeal. For the RAF, Fighter Command had achieved a great victory in successfully carrying out Sir Thomas Iskib's 1937 air policy of preventing the Germans from knocking Britain out of the war. The battle also significantly shifted American opinion. During the battle, many Americans accepted the view promoted by Joseph Kennedy, the American ambassador in London, who believed that the United Kingdom could not survive. Roosevelt wanted a second opinion and sent Wild Bill Donovan on a brief visit to the UK. He became convinced the UK would survive and should be supported in every possible way. Before the end of the war, American journalist Ralph Ingersoll, after returning from Britain, published a book concluding that Adolf Hitler met his first defeat in 8 years, in what might go down in history as a battle as important as Waterloo or Gettysburg. A turning point was when the Germans reduced the intensity of the Blitz after 15th of September, certainly on British airfields. According to Ingersoll, a majority of responsible British officers who fought through this battle believed that if Hitler and Göring had had the courage and the resources to lose 200 planes a day for the next 5 days, nothing could have saved London. Instead, the Luftwaffe's morale in combat is definitely broken, and the RAF has been gaining in strength each week. So these are both sides exaggerated, of course, their losses, right? Claims, numbers shot down. Post-war analysis records were shown that between July and September, the RAF claimed 2,698 kills, while the Luftwaffe claimed 3,198 RAF air crews down. Total losses in the start and end of dates and of course record losses vary on both sides. Luftwaffe losses 10th, of course that was 10th, 30th October, 10th July, 30th October. 1,977 aircraft, including 243 twin, 569 single-engine fighters, 822 bombers, and so this is all just more data. So in total, the Germans lost 2,550 aircraft roughly. British looked like it was 1,064 aircraft lost and over 540 aircrew. Amazing losses though, but amazing defeat for the Germans. Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.